The second Stephen Walsh leaned back in that overpriced ergonomic chair, lips curling like he'd just won some corporate power play, that this was going to be one of those days people talk about for years. His voice carried that smug confidence of a 35-year-old MBA who thought business school taught him everything about running a company. Badge, laptop, and access cards on my desk. Now. No preamble, no explanation, just a public execution in front of the entire all-hands meeting. 150 employees watching from their conference room seats and video calls, including Jessica Park, the 27-year-old developer I'd been mentoring for the past 2 years. She looked like she'd been slapped. Hell, we all did. My name's Timothy Richardson, Tim to most folks, and I'm 49 years old. Been with this company for 22 years, built half their infrastructure with my own hands. Started here when I got out of the Air Force, where I'd spent 6 years keeping their IT systems running in places that would make a grown man cry. Kandahar mostly, making sure our communications stayed up while the world tried to tear them down. That's where I learned patience, planning, and the value of preparation. When I walked into this place in 2002, it had maybe 30 employees and servers held together with duct tape and hope. I was 27, fresh out of the service, and hungry to build something that would last. Met my ex-wife Sarah at the company Christmas party that same year. She was in accounting back then. We had some good years before things fell apart. The divorce was finalized 3 years ago, but we still talk when it comes to Jake, our 19-year-old son who's a sophomore at State studying computer science. Kid's got my brain for systems and his mother's common sense, which makes him smarter than both of us. The tuition payments hit my checking account like a sledgehammer every semester. $8,400 for in-state plus room and board. Between that and the monthly support payments to Sarah, I wasn't exactly living large, but I was making it work. Had been for 22 years through 3 CEOs, 2 major acquisitions, and more reorganizations than I could count. Stephen even paused after access cards like he was expecting applause from his audience. This was the new operations director they'd brought in 6 months ago to optimize costs and streamline operations. Translation: fire expensive old-timers and replace them with cheaper alternatives. I was apparently expensive at $95,000 a year for keeping their entire digital infrastructure from collapsing. I didn't give him the satisfaction of begging. 6 years in the Air Force teaches you that some battles aren't worth fighting in public. I took my badge off with one smooth motion, set it next to the laptop I'd already powered down during his little speech, and placed my access cards beside them like I was arranging items for inspection. You'll be receiving information about Cobra and your final paycheck from HR, Stephen added, clearly enjoying his moment in the spotlight. Security will escort you to collect any personal items. That's when I almost smiled. Because Stephen Walsh, with his freshly minted MBA from some prestigious program, had no idea what he'd just done. He thought he was firing a middle-aged IT guy who'd gotten too comfortable and too expensive. What he'd actually done was fire the architect of their entire digital ecosystem. See, about 12 years ago, when the company was growing fast and needed better security, I'd proposed building a centralized authentication system. Management loved the idea but balked at the vendor quotes, $200,000 for implementation, plus $50,000 annually for licensing. So I made them an offer. Let me build it myself through my consulting company, Off Guard Solutions, for half the price. I'd founded Off Guard as a side business years earlier, mostly doing small contracts for local firms. But this was my masterpiece. Over the next 3 years, I built them a system that didn't just handle logins. It managed everything: network access, physical security badges, HVAC controls, even the smart locks on the supply closets. Every electronic function in that building ran through Off Guard's authentication layer. And because I wasn't stupid, I wrote the licensing agreement myself. Legal approved it without really reading it, focused as they were on the cost savings. Buried in Section 12, subsection C, was language so clear a first-year law student couldn't miss it. This license shall remain valid only while the named founder remains actively employed by the licensee. Termination of employment, voluntary or otherwise, will result in immediate termination of the master license. I walked out of that conference room with my head high, security trailing behind me like I was some kind of flight risk. My desk was exactly as I'd left it that morning. Coffee mug still half full, a picture of Jake at his high school graduation, and a small American flag I'd kept since my discharge ceremony. 22 years of my life packed into one cardboard box. The security guard was polite enough, a guy named Pete I'd known for 15 years. "Sorry about this, Tim," he muttered as we walked toward the exit. "This is garbage." "Just business, Pete," I told him. But inside, I was thinking about that license agreement and wondering how long it would take them to realize what they'd lost. Out in the parking lot, I didn't get angry. Anger clouds judgment, and the Air Force had beaten that lesson into me during some very long nights in Afghanistan. I sat in my truck, hands on the wheel, feeling oddly clear-headed for the first time in months. 22 years of loyalty, and this was how it ended. But as I drove home through the afternoon traffic, something else was settling in my mind. Stephen Walsh had just made the biggest mistake of his career. He just didn't know it yet. The thing about military training is it teaches you to think in terms of mission parameters and contingency planning. Driving home that afternoon, I wasn't sulking about getting fired. I was calculating variables. HR would process my termination paperwork by end of business. The system would update overnight. By morning, every electronic lock, every login portal, every network connection in that building would be asking for authentication from a license that no longer existed. I live in a modest two-bedroom apartment about 20 minutes from the office. Nothing fancy, but it's clean and quiet, which is all I need these days. After Sarah and I split up, I sold the house and moved into this place. Figured I didn't need 2,400 square feet just for me and Jake's weekend visits. The extra money from the house sale went into his college fund, which was looking pretty important right about now. I poured myself 2 fingers of bourbon. Maker's Mark, nothing too fancy but better than the rot gut we used to drink in the barracks, and sat down at my kitchen table with my personal laptop. The Off-Guard Solutions admin panel loaded up like it had thousands of times before, showing me a real-time view of their entire infrastructure. 847 active users logged in, email servers humming along, network traffic flowing smooth as silk through 23 different access points, physical security showing 312 badge swipes in the last hour as people left for the day. Everything green, everything normal, everything about to change in approximately 12 hours. The beauty of the system I'd built was its simplicity. One master authentication server handling everything, with redundant fail-safes that all pointed back to the same licensing check. I designed it that way on purpose. Single point of control, impossible to bypass without admin credentials that only existed in my Off-Guard database. Stephen Walsh probably thought IT stood for Internet Things or something equally ignorant. He'd looked at the org chart, seen my salary, and decided I was an expensive luxury they could do without. What he didn't understand was the difference between cost and value. I wasn't just another employee. I was the keystone holding the entire arch together. My phone rang around 8 p.m. Daniel Rodriguez, my closest ally in the engineering department and one of the few people who actually understood what Off-Guard did for the company. We'd worked together for 15 years, and I'd taught him most of what he knew about network architecture. "Tim, man, what the hell happened today?" His voice was tight with anger. "Stephen just fired you in front of everyone? That's insane." "Cost optimization," I said, taking another sip of bourbon. "Apparently 22 years of keeping their systems running is too expensive." "This is garbage, Tim. Half the department is talking about updating their resumes. You know Martinez from security? He said if they fired you, nobody's safe. I appreciated the loyalty, but Daniel had a mortgage and 2 kids to think about. Don't do anything stupid, Dan. You've got a family to feed." "Yeah, but still..." He paused, and I could hear him thinking, "Hey, random question. That authentication system you built, Off-Guard, whatever, what happens to that now that you're gone?" There it was. Daniel was smart enough to start connecting dots. "You'd have to ask Stephen about that. I'm not employed there anymore, remember?" A longer pause. "Tim, please tell me you didn't build in some kind of kill switch. Nothing so dramatic," I said honestly. "Just standard licensing protocols. Everything's in the contract legal approved years ago." "Jesus. How long do we have?" "You should probably ask the new management about their contingency plans." I kept my voice neutral, but Daniel knew me well enough to read between the lines. "Tim, listen to me carefully. Whatever you're planning, think about it. There are good people there who don't deserve to get caught in the crossfire." That stopped me for a minute. Daniel was right. There were good people at that company. Jessica Park, just starting her career. Pete, from security who'd walked me out with genuine regret. The admin assistants who remembered my birthday every year and always made sure there was cake in the break room. But then I thought about Stephen Walsh's smirk as he told me to leave my dignity on his desk. The way he'd staged my firing like some corporate theater production, making sure everyone could see him flexing his authority. The complete disregard for 22 years of dedication and loyalty. The good people will be fine, Dan. This isn't about them. After I hung up, I walked out onto my balcony and looked toward downtown, where the company's office building was lit up against the night sky. Somewhere in there, Stephen was probably still at his desk, working late to make an impression on the board. Maybe planning his next round of optimizations. Maybe drafting an email about how he'd successfully eliminated an unnecessary expense. In about 10 hours, his phone was going to start ringing. I finished my bourbon and went inside. Tomorrow would be interesting, but tonight I had practical matters to handle. Cobra insurance paperwork to review, unemployment benefits to file for, and a difficult conversation with Jake about what this meant for his college funding. My severance package would cover 6 weeks, and I had some savings, but single-income households don't have much margin for error. I called Jake around 10 p.m., knowing he'd still be awake. College kids keep weird hours. "Hey, Dad, what's up?" He sounded tired, probably studying or playing video games with his roommate. "Got some news, son. Lost my job today." Silence for a few seconds. "Seriously? Why?" "New management, cost cutting. Nothing I did wrong, just politics." "Dad, are you okay? I mean, financially? Should I look into more loans or maybe transfer somewhere cheaper?" This is why I was proud of that kid, 22 years old and already thinking like a man. "Don't worry about that right now. I've got some options and we'll figure it out together. Just focus on your studies. If you need me to come home, absolutely not. You stay right where you are and keep working hard. I didn't spend 22 years building systems so you could drop out of college because some MBA got trigger-happy with the layoff list." After we hung up, I sat in the quiet of my apartment, thinking about contingencies and consequences. The system failure that was coming wasn't revenge. It was the natural result of Stephen's decision. He'd fired the person responsible for maintaining their infrastructure without understanding what that infrastructure actually did. By morning, he'd start to learn, and by afternoon, he'd be wishing he'd never heard my name. I woke up at 6:30 a.m. without an alarm clock, same as I had for the past 22 years. Old habits die hard, especially when the Air Force drilled them into you for 6 years. For about 3 seconds, I started mentally going through my morning routine. Shower, coffee, check overnight tickets, drive to the office. Then, reality hit. No office, no overnight tickets, no job. The silence was strange. For 2 decades, my phone had been buzzing by 7 a.m. with some crisis or another. Server hiccups, network slowdowns, user lockouts. I'd become the unofficial first responder for everything digital, which meant my phone never really stopped ringing. But this morning, nothing. Just the sound of traffic outside and Mrs. Sullivan next door starting her car for her commute. I made coffee and checked my personal laptop out of habit. The off-guard admin panel showed what I expected. License status showed terminated in red letters across the top of the screen. Below that, a cascade of error messages as 847 user accounts tried to authenticate against a system that no longer recognized them. The beautiful thing about good engineering is that it fails gracefully but completely. I hadn't built in any malicious code or dramatic destruction, just a clean, immediate cutoff. Every login attempt would receive the same polite error message: authentication temporarily unavailable. Please contact your system administrator. Of course, their system administrator had been fired yesterday. My phone stayed quiet until 8:47 a.m. Then it started. Text from Jessica Park. "Mr. Richardson, nobody can log into anything. Email, CRM, client portals. Everything's down. IT doesn't know what's wrong." I didn't respond. Jessica was a smart kid, and she'd figure out the connection soon enough. 20 minutes later, Daniel Rodriguez called. His voice was tight with stress. "Tim, we've got a situation here. Everything's locked up tight. Can't access email, can't log into the development servers, can't even badge into the secure areas. Steven's running around like his hair's on fire asking who broke the internet." "Sounds like a challenging morning," I said, keeping my voice neutral. "Tim, come on. This is the off-guard system, isn't it? The license thing you mentioned? I'm not employed there anymore, Dan. You'd have to ask management about their vendor relationships. A pause, then quietly. How long do we have? I mean, how long before they figure out what's happening? Depends on how smart your new operations director is. I took a sip of coffee and looked out my kitchen window at the morning traffic. Somewhere in that stream of cars were dozens of my former colleagues sitting in parking lots and coffee shops, unable to get into their own building because their badge system was down. Jesus, Tim, the clients are going to lose their minds. That was when I felt the first small stab of guilt. Daniel was right. This wasn't just about Stephen Walsh. Every minute the system stayed down meant angry clients, missed deadlines, and lost revenue for a company that employed a lot of good people. But then I thought about Stephen's smirk as he told me to pack my dignity along with my laptop. Some lessons are expensive, but they stick. I'm sure Stephen will figure something out, I said. He's got an MBA, right? By 10:30, my phone was buzzing every few minutes. Texts from people I hadn't heard from in months, all asking variations of the same question. Is this connected to you getting fired? I ignored most of them, but when Martinez from facilities texted to say they couldn't even control the HVAC system, I almost felt bad. It was going to be a hot day, and 150 people sitting in an overheated building while their entire infrastructure collapsed wasn't exactly comfortable. Around 11 a.m., I got a call from an unknown number with the company's area code. Mr. Richardson, this is Carol from IT support. I'm calling because we're having some technical difficulties with our authentication system, and your name came up as someone who might be able to help. Poor Carol. Probably some contractor or junior tech who'd been handed a phone and told to start calling anyone who might know something about their setup. I'm sorry, Carol, but I don't work there anymore. You'll need to contact Off-Guard Solutions directly for any licensing or technical issues. I see. Do you happen to have their contact information? I almost smiled. It should be in your vendor database. Or you could try a Google search. After I hung up, I walked out onto my balcony and looked toward downtown. From my apartment, I couldn't see their building, but I could imagine what was happening. Stephen in his office, probably on his third or fourth phone call to IT vendors, trying to find someone who could fix a problem he didn't understand. Middle managers explaining to increasingly agitated clients why nobody could access their accounts. The CEO, Michael Collins, asking pointed questions about why their entire infrastructure had apparently been built around one person. My phone rang again at 11:47. This time it was a number I recognized. The main company line. Tim. It wasn't a question. Stephen's voice was different now, stripped of yesterday's smugness and replaced with something that sounded like controlled panic. Stephen. I kept my voice level, professional. We need to talk. I'm not employed there anymore, remember? You made that pretty clear yesterday. A pause. In the background I could hear voices, stress-filled conversations, the sound of a company in crisis mode. Right. Look, we're having some issues with our authentication system. The vendor says the license is tied to you personally. That's correct. Another pause, longer this time. I could practically hear him choosing his words carefully. What would it take to get that restored? And there it was. Less than 24 hours after firing me in front of 150 people, Stephen Walsh was asking for my help. The same man who told me to leave my dignity on his desk was now forced to come back, hat in hand, begging for the expertise he'd dismissed as too expensive. You'll need to contact Off-Guard Solutions about any licensing discussions, I said calmly. I believe you have their information. Tim, come on, we both know you're Off-Guard Solutions. Then you should probably talk to them about restoring service. I'm just enjoying my first day of retirement. I hung up before he could respond. Not angrily, not dramatically, just cleanly, the way you end a business call when the conversation is over. Outside, the sun was getting higher, and it was shaping up to be a beautiful day. The silence after I hung up on Stephen lasted exactly 43 minutes. Then my phone rang again, but this time it was a number that made me sit up straighter. Michael Collins's direct line. Our CEO didn't make social calls, especially not to recently fired employees. Tim, it's Mike Collins. His voice was calm, but I could hear the weight behind it. Military guys learn to recognize when their commanding officer is keeping it together through pure discipline. We need to talk. Good morning, Mike. I just got out of the most unpleasant hour of my life, listening to our entire executive team explain why we can't access our own building. You want to tell me what's happening here? I respected Mike Collins. He was 61, former Navy submarine commander who'd built this company from a 30-person startup into an 800-employee operation. When he spoke, people listened, including me. But respect didn't change the facts. I'm no longer employed there, Mike. Stephen made that pretty clear yesterday. A long pause. Tim, I wasn't in that meeting. I was in Chicago meeting with investors. When I got back this morning and heard what happened, I couldn't believe it. Believe it. Your operations director decided 22 years of institutional knowledge was too expensive. And now we can't even turn on the coffee machines without calling the vendor. Mike's voice carried the dry humor of someone who'd seen enough stupidity to last several lifetimes. Help me understand something. This off-guard system, that's yours? My company built and licensed it to you, yes. And the licensing terms are exactly what legal approved 12 years ago. Another pause. I could hear him, thinking, probably pulling up the contract on his screen. Mike was hands-on enough to read the fine print himself. Jesus Christ, Tim. Valid only while the named founder remains actively employed. How did this get past everyone? It didn't get past anyone. It was reviewed, approved, and signed by the appropriate parties. The systems worked flawlessly for 12 years. Until yesterday. Until yesterday, I agreed. Mike was quiet for almost a minute. When he spoke again, his voice had shifted into command mode. I'm calling an emergency board meeting for this afternoon. Can you be here at 3 p.m.? Are you offering me my job back? I'm offering you a conversation. The rest we'll figure out in the room. At 2:45 p.m., I walked back into the building I'd been escorted out of 24 hours earlier. Pete from security was working the manual override on the front door, letting people in and out by hand since the electronic badge system was still down. He looked embarrassed when he saw me. Hey, Tim. Sorry about, well, all of this. Not your fault, Pete. Just doing your job. The elevator was running on emergency power mode, manually operated, no floor controls. I rode up to the executive floor with Daniel Rodriguez, who'd been summoned to provide technical background. How bad is it, Dan? Bad. We've lost 2 major clients already. Henderson Industries and that law firm downtown. They can't access their files, their billing data, nothing. Steven's been making phone calls all day, trying to find contractors who can fix this. Any luck? Daniel shook his head. 3 different firms took one look at the off-guard integration and told him it would take 6 to 8 weeks to rebuild from scratch. And that's if we still had all the documentation. Do you? Some of it. Most of the deep architecture stuff is in your head. The boardroom was tense when we walked in. Mike Collins sat at the head of the table, flanked by 2 board members I recognized, Patricia Wong from legal and Robert Martinez, who represented the investors. Stephen Walsh sat at the far end, looking like he hadn't slept in 36 hours. His expensive suit was wrinkled, and his MBA confidence had evaporated into something that looked like barely controlled panic. Tim, thanks for coming. Mike gestured to an empty chair. I think you know everyone except our emergency IT consultant. He nodded toward a tired-looking woman in her 50s with a laptop open in front of her. Ellen Brooks from Secure Systems Incorporated. Ellen, this is Timothy Richardson, our former IT director and the founder of Off-Guard Solutions. Ellen looked up from her screen. Mr. Richardson, I've been reviewing your system architecture. It's comprehensive. Thank you. Also completely impossible to bypass without administrator credentials. My firm specializes in authentication recovery, and I've never seen anything this tightly integrated. Mike leaned forward. Ellen estimates 2 to 3 months and $400,000 to rebuild our infrastructure from scratch, assuming we can find all the documentation and retrain our staff on new systems. What about our current systems? Patricia Wong asked. Dead in the water until Mr. Richardson chooses to restore the license. All eyes turned to me. I opened the folder I'd brought and slid copies of a single document across the table. New licensing agreement. Updated terms reflecting current market rates and the critical nature of the service. Stephen finally spoke, his voice hoarse. What are you asking for? I kept my voice calm, professional. Restoration of the master license under a 5-year agreement at $125,000 annually, paid in advance. Consulting contract for system documentation and knowledge transfer at $450 per hour, estimated 200 hours. And a personal apology letter acknowledging that yesterday's termination was handled inappropriately. The room went quiet. Patricia Wong was already scanning the contract, her legal mind checking for traps. Robert Martinez was calculating costs. Mike was watching Stephen, probably wondering if his operations director was worth the trouble of keeping. The apology letter, Stephen said slowly. What exactly would that say? That the decision to terminate my employment was made without proper consideration of operational dependencies, and that the process failed to meet professional standards. Stephen's face went white. I'm not admitting to wrongdoing. Then your systems stay down, I said simply. Your choice. Mike leaned back in his chair, studying Stephen with the expression of a submarine commander deciding whether to surface in hostile waters. After what felt like an hour but was probably 30 seconds, he turned to me. We'll sign. The contract negotiation took another hour, but it was mostly technical details. Ellen Brooks would work with me on the knowledge transfer. Daniel Rodriguez would be promoted to IT director with a $15,000 raise. Stephen Walsh would be transferring to the Seattle office within 60 days, a lateral move that everyone understood was corporate speak for career over. When the last signature was dry, I stood and shook Mike's hand. Pleasure doing business with you. Tim, Mike said quietly. For what it's worth, this never should have happened. No, sir, it shouldn't have. But it did, and now everyone knows the real cost of institutional knowledge. I walked out of that building with a 5-year contract worth $625,000 and the quiet satisfaction of someone who'd not only survived an ambush but had turned it into a strategic victory. Behind me, Stephen Walsh was probably updating his LinkedIn profile and wondering how he'd explain this catastrophe to future employers. 3 weeks later, Jake called to tell me his grades were good enough for the dean's list. I didn't tell him that his tuition was now secure for the next 5 years. Or that his old man had just learned that sometimes the best revenge is simply letting people face the consequences of their own decisions. That's how you handle it when someone mistakes your quiet competence for weakness. You don't get mad, you don't get loud, you get professional terms and conditions that ensure it never happens again. Sometimes the people who talk the least are the ones holding everything together, and the loudest lesson comes when they simply walk away and let gravity do the rest. In a world obsessed with cutting costs and chasing the latest trends, never forget that some things can't be Googled, outsourced, or replaced by a cheaper alternative. Institutional knowledge walks out the door with the person who built it.